Thank you very much, Bridget, for that very kind introduction, and good morning to everyone here, but also good morning or good day to everyone who might be watching this remotely. So wherever you are, you're more than welcome. I'm going to discuss briefly handling the media. Now, you may wonder, well, why should a surveyor be interested in this topic? Well, the fact of the matter is, as you progress through your surveying careers and become more and more senior and recognized within the industry and outside it, the chances are greater that you will be asked to comment on media. Now, with regard to media, I'm looking at traditional media. I'm not going to talk about social media, because as I said yesterday, I am a dinosaur. However, handling the media is something that I think you should know about, because you never really know when you might be asked to comment. Now, earlier this year, we had the tragedy of flight MH370. No sooner had that disappeared from the main news headlines, we had the awful incident of the Korean ferry seawall, which was truly horrific in every sense of the word. And no sooner had that disappeared, here in the UK at least, we had the yacht Cheeky Rafiki, which was finally assumed to have gone. They found the hull, but no crew members. So all these cases achieved some media interest at varying levels. I just put this photograph in. That is not the Cheeky Rafiki, but that was a boat with a photographer being overtaken by a sailing boat preparing to start a race. And the question I have for the mariners here, who has right of way? Answers on a piece of paper, I'll get them later. The media that I'm going to talk about really is television, and that's live television or recorded, radio to an extent, a little bit on newspapers, and a little bit on what I call professional journals. I did some media training with John Humphreys and others many years ago, so some of the lessons that he taught me I'm transmitting on to you. And I can't honestly say that I paid a lot of heed to them in my early days. And I got caught out very badly in Fiji when I made a statement to what I thought was Fiji television, only to find it went international. And within 2 hours, my client in London had called me up and given me what can only be described as a bollocking. So you have to remember that anything you say, and I do mean anything, may be published or broadcast. There is no such thing as off the record. And if any media hound say to you, well, why don't you just give us a little comment off the record? Don't, because it will be noted, and if it's appropriate, it will be used, and your name will be tagged to it. And we've all seen these boo-boos that various presidents of the United States and other politicians have made, thinking they are not on air. So there's nothing the broadcasters like more is an off-the-record comment that is embarrassing, because it makes great television or radio. And another word of warning that John Humphreys, by the way, is quite a well-known UK broadcaster, and he now runs the early morning programme on BBC Radio 4, and his style of questioning can be quite aggressive, to say the least. But you have to be aware that if you're doing a recorded interview, you're giving the editor a great chance to make you look a fool if that's what he wants. Equally, he can make you look absolutely splendid if that's what he wants. Now, very often, or more often than not, you can't avoid a recorded interview. So if your interview is being recorded, do be very careful how you put it together. Because at the end of the day, it is your neck that is on the recording block. This photograph has got absolutely nothing to do with the media, but I thought some of you surveyors might be pleased to like to see a 1,000-ton crane in operation. We have, as Alan Brink will know, we have the big Costa Concordia refloating scheduled within a month or so. That is petty cash by comparison. Looking at television just a little bit, and we will finish on time, by the way, don't worry. The TV news. Now, many of you are old enough to remember the pre-CNN days when the news came on at 5 o'clock in the evening or 9 o'clock in the evening, and that was it. Now, news is a 24/7 industry. They have to fill that screen all day, every day, and if they don't, they're in serious trouble. And that has made a big difference, in my view, in how news is presented. And this is where I'm coming to. If you are asked to appear on television, bear in mind that the news people want you there to help fill the space. If it's a major story, a huge shipwreck or plane crash or something like that, that's slightly different. But for many of the incidents that you might be asked to comment on, and I'll come back to comment just in a minute, you are filling space on the screen. Now, I've said here, prepare beforehand. You will get notification, by and large, that you're going to be asked to appear on television. So do your homework. When I was asked about the seawall, well, I'd obviously never heard of this ferry, and I can't imagine anyone in this room had heard of that particular ship. But much as I'm a dinosaur, I can use Google after a fashion. And of course, if you use Google well, you could pick up an awful lot of background information that you wouldn't normally have. But it did help me when I was eventually put up on air to find out what the ship looked like, what modifications had publicly been made to her, where she plied and all that sort of thing. And that was extremely useful because you went on air giving some sort of impression you knew what you were talking about. And there's nothing worse, and it has happened, where you're asked to make a comment on something about which you know very little, and I'll come back to that in a minute. When I say, are you comfortable? If you're not comfortable with appearing before the camera and being asked questions or awkward questions, then don't do it, because you will look very uncomfortable on screen. The camera never lies, and I'm looking at one over there now, and I hope I appear to be quite comfortable. But it is very important, because if you look nervous, and you would have seen it yourself looking at television broadcasts and people being interviewed, people who are not responding well, who are a little bit nervous, not because of the subject, just because of their makeup. So if you're not comfortable, don't do it. And well, that's the other point. I'm coming back to that as well. The other thing I say, stick to the facts, because don't try and lobby. And if you, well, speculation is, I'm getting a little side thing here from Bridget. No. Speculation is all part of it. In fact, I'll come back to speculation, but stick to the facts, as they say. If you've got a case to make, a lobbying case, political or anything like that, don't do it. If you're there as a guest, as an interviewee, you're not there to push your own beliefs. If you want to push your own beliefs, go to the other programs and try that. And as I say, I'll come back to speculation in a minute. But the important thing is dress the part. During the MH370, that was live news for a long time. All the pundits that turned up, people like me, other guests, Graham Bowles was there, lots of pilots and experts, we all turned up in sober suits, looking and feeling that we were part of the tragedy. You do not turn up looking like Coco the Clown. And it did actually upset me personally, because some people did turn up looking like Coco the Clown. Coco the Clown, is a very famous British circus clown with a big red nose, big floppy shoes, and all the rest of it. And I'm sad to say that one or two people turned up, and what was a tragic situation, not looking the part. And I can only imagine that the relatives and other people affected by the tragedy seeing this would say, he doesn't care, he's turned up looking a mess. And I think you have to show respect. Another important thing is, if you get the chance, you may or may not meet the presenter beforehand, but you will meet the floor manager, and I'll come to him in a second. They will ask you how you wish to be introduced. And it varied in my case. Very often, as you will see, Sky News introduced me as John Noble, salvage expert from Constellation Marine. The BBC are a little bit more circumspect, because sometimes they see that as advertising, and they are a bit sensitive to that. And these are just two photographs taken during the same interview. Be aware, one is half respectable, the other one looks like I've seen a ghost. But, at the time when I was being on screen, you don't know where you're being photographed from. There are 4 or 5 cameras around you. You have no control as to which camera is on you, what angle, and how your expressions are being recorded and then transmitted. So I made a bit of a mistake there. I'd look like something horrendous. But you do have to be aware of that. And I've got 2 photographs there. I call them grumpy or smiley for good reason. When I was doing some work for the Korean English-speaking channel, the Skype didn't work, or not well enough. Usually it did, but in this case it did. So they said, can you send a photograph? So the first photograph I sent was the one of me smiling. And perhaps it was insensitive, because it was the only one I could find at the time. And they were on the phone immediately saying, have you got a photograph of you not smiling, bearing in mind some 300 people were likely to have died. So I had to go through my own archives and dig out what I call the grumpy photograph, which they then doctored slightly before it went on screen. So it is a point to, the tragedy or whatever it is might not be affecting you directly, but do learn, as I had to, that if you're in a smiley situation and it's a tragedy, you will be seen in a bad light. Who is who? You will have seen Sky, CNN, your own local TV channels, and you will see the presenter. You probably have your own presenters, and that's what he does. He is just the presenter. Now, depending on his seniority and stature, he will have some influence over the director and others as to what goes on, but not necessarily. The director will decide what's going to go in the program. Hopefully he might be influenced by the presenter, but you never know. Then it's the producer's job to put it all together. Now, there are various producers. And if you're appearing in a studio, you will deal with the producer who handles guests. On Sky, certainly, you're known as a guest if you're appearing on one of their programs. The most interesting character is what I call the floor manager. Now, you don't see him, you don't even see the producer, but the floor manager is sitting just out of camera shot with a laptop like this, with a minute or even half minute by minute account of what is going to be broadcast. And he'll have an earphone and he'll be told from above the timings, if there's a bit of an overrun on one topic or another. But be prepared. You might be sitting there thinking, well, I'm all wired up, ready to go, and something else happens. I had one instance where one of our senior politicians said something which upset a lot of people, so I just disappeared from the news, and he took over. And it's quite brutal. So you have to be prepared to be kicked out of the studio at short notice. And the most frightening thing to us amateurs is the research department. At Sky, for example, and BBC is just the same, so I'm not giving any favoritism. They have a room with about 30 people who are doing nothing but researching the news. And they've got all the best gadgets going and research engines. And if you say something that is perhaps a little bit controversial, they will be onto it immediately. And if they're really good, they'll go back to the presenter, who will then ask a follow-up question. And it is quite incredible how methodology, I'll come back to that in a minute, these guys are. Don't underestimate them. And this is just another photograph with no real relevance to what we're talking about, but it's a ship sinking, because that's what we don't like to see. Going on with television, and I'm aware I've got 5 minutes left, although I might just stretch it by a minute. When you're on television, the one thing the camera does not like is a shiny nose, and I don't have any makeup on this morning. You will, when you arrive at the studio, the chances are the first place you will visit is the makeup room. And they're not trying to make you look like Bridget Bardot in her heyday. They're trying to make you look that you haven't got a shiny nose, a shiny chin, and a shiny forehead. They don't slap, well, they do a bit of eye stuff on and make you look up. But you will be made up, because that is to your benefit, except on one occasion. I don't know who the girl was, but she made me up, and on screen I looked like a ghost. She used this white powder. And the other thing to remember when you're in television, not only the audience that you, the television audience, is your family. They are the biggest critics of all. If you've got a shiny nose, or if your ties squint, or your jacket's not done up properly, your wife or girlfriend or daughter or son will pick it up. So it's important that you look the part, and the makeup people will do their best, generally. Then, as I was just now, just before we started, you're wired up. That is a last minute thing. You'll go and be sitting down by the presenter, or depending where you are, one of the cameramen will come and make sure you're wired, and they will test it. They will not rely at all on you just being okay. They will test it, and they'll test the volume levels, and they'll make sure that you look and speak the part. I mentioned remote interviews because you might be in the studio, or you might be on Skype. Now, you will all have seen Skype interviews on television. It's not as good quality. I did some, no, I won't say this because this might be broadcast. I'll tell you after at coffee. But Skype CNN used it, and they were quite happy. The television people are more likely to want to use Skype than the radio. The radio people are sound perfectionists, and they do not like Skype because the sound quality in Skype generally is not very good. And when your interview's finished, that's it. You'll be told by the runner, Now the runner is the bottom of the ladder. He or she is gone into a television company with the hope of getting in and becoming a presenter or a producer or a director. The runner will tell you, okay, you can go now. But before you do any interviews, I didn't, but they have some stations will allow what they call inconvenience money. Your fees and expenses for getting there will always be met. Your expenses. The fee is something that's a bit more sensitive. And that's another photograph that has absolutely nothing to do with what I'm talking about, but you can bet your bottom dollar that was taken by a media helicopter.
5 minutes.
5 minutes, right, I can do that in 5 minutes. Radio. Now, I imagine most people here have been on radio. Maybe most of you have been on television, but is it a studio interview where the sound quality will naturally be very good? And here in the UK with the BBC, we're lucky in Southampton, BBC have major studios here, so I could just pop down there and any station, BBC station in the UK would use that output. The Welsh people did, for example. And I say dress the part. If you're going into a studio which has got radio and television and you're come over quite well, the local television studio might then ask you to do an interview for them. And if you go in looking like you go with your pajamas on or whatever, they won't use it, obviously. So I still think even for radio, you should dress the part if it's appropriate.
Most radio programmes are also filmed these days
before
the internet.
Yes, indeed. So I did turn up one day not wearing a suit, but nonetheless, it went all right. And if you're doing a radio interview, it's actually quite easy. You'll be given, they will test you first, make sure you can hear what they're saying and you can be heard. And then you'll hear the program going out. And then the presenter will say, now we have Captain Joe Bloggs in our studio, and then they'll lead into the questions. So you will see that, it's quite a comfortable experience, you don't have to worry about it. The other thing, don't say and we've all done it here, all the presenters, me included, we say we say or we say, people don't know, that's why you're there. So you should bear that in mind. And as I did earlier on, I used a long word that I hadn't rehearsed. Do not use any long words that you haven't rehearsed. I know it sounds silly, you might use it every day in life, but if you're going to use an awkward word, just say it to yourself before you go on air. Nothing worse, as I did earlier, stumbling over a word, because everyone concentrates on that rather than what you're trying to say. Are you there as an expert or a representative? I was generally there as an expert. If you're there as a company representative, then you have to make sure you follow the company media policy. And as I say, do not volunteer information because it will be researched and you'll be tripped up if it's wrong. And don't lie or cover up. Now this particularly applies if you're involved in a shipping casualty and there is all sorts of issues going on. But if you lie, you will be found out. All these researchers will be listening and they get extra brownie points if they find you out. The printed word I'll go through very quickly. I'm not going to cover the professional journals as I said. Newspapers, magazines, current affairs, they do require a different approach. You've got more time to write things out. But who's in control? The editor. And I'm sure Bridget will support this. Who has the last word? The editor. So you've got to be very careful in the written media and talk to the editor. And if it's a professional journal, make sure you read what's going to be printed before it's published.
I would advise brevity. don't be too eager.
No, absolutely.
Just stick to the brief. If they ask you what day of the week it is, say today. Don't say, oh, Wednesday follows and then Friday, because then you can find yourself trapped.
Yeah. Now, this photograph does have some relevance because it was said 2 or 3 times yesterday, a picture speaks 1,000 words, and that is a contemporaneous, I don't know who took it, photograph, and that tells you just about everything you want to know. A horrific situation, possibly loss of life, and so forth. And going back to the media, they have tremendous resources. You know, it's nothing for them to get a helicopter and whiz out to see a casualty while you, the surveyor, are being seasick in a small boat. And that is... Now, I'm just going to finish, Bridget, with just a few hints and tips. Do remember the golden rules that I have tried to mention. And think about who has control of the situation. It most likely will not be you. But equally, you don't want to be trampled all over. Bear in mind who you are speaking for. Now, if you're a surveyor, it's actually sometimes quite difficult to give the broadcasters much help because you don't want to lose the chance of becoming involved in a casualty. Or if you are, you don't want to say anything that might upset your clients or prospective customers. And most big companies, and even small ones now, will have a media representative, and if there is one, be guided by them. If they say you don't talk, you do not talk. Do you have the authority to speak or write? A lot of people will speak and write about something and they haven't really got permission to do it. Nothing's worse. And the last one may seem to be a bit of a joke, and I'm not going to do it because I am on camera. Do not scratch your backside, pick your nose, put your finger in your ear, or dribble, because the camera will pick it up. The only thing you should do before you go on is give your lips a bit of a lick, because that actually helps. It's better than putting on lipstick. So ladies and gentlemen, on that note, I think it's just about coffee time, and I hope I've passed Bridget's stringent analysis. Thank you very much, and thank you to...
Does anyone have any questions at all?
A very, very quick one. You say you don't use social media, but how often do you Google yourself?
I've never Googled myself.
Because that would show you what's out there.
Yeah, no, but I have a thing about social media, and it's a security thing. I'm in LinkedIn, but that's all. I have the one that is worth looking at is YouTube. Now, Zarir very kindly put a few of the clips that I was involved on YouTube, and that's actually very useful. Not so much you can't correct yourself what you said, but you can see if you were picking your nose or whatever, and that's very useful because you can pick up. I've got certain foibles that came out, and probably came out this morning, but you know, it's non-stop. These professionals you see are very good, and they develop their style. Richard Quest in CNN, I think he's very good, but he has developed over many years a style. Jeremy Paxman here in the UK and others in other parts of the world I don't know.
I think
Peter.
the thing is that you should bear in mind that you're not there because you're polished. You're there because you're an expert.
Exactly.
And within the guidelines that John says of not desperately embarrassing yourself, that the whole idea is that you are there for the experience and the expertise that you can bring to bear. And you can get control, even with a very aggressive questioner, by absolutely sticking to your brief.
But you must do.
Definitely not apportioning blame, because
No.
you're always called in. I think the other thing that you should bear in mind is that they always have an agenda, and that they have really decided the story long before they've even decided who they're going to interview.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, they want to blame the master or the shipping company or the flag of convenience,
Yeah.
or something, but there has to be a blame.
Yeah,
There
and
has to be a blame.
if you're asked to speculate, as I was on several occasions, you must say, I'm sorry, I can't speculate
Well,
on
we
that.
don't know enough of the facts
You know,
early on, and I think
and-
it's always fair, and you can always bring it back and say, we don't know enough about
Yeah.
whether there was bad weather, or whether there was fog, or whether the
Yeah.
boat people were slow on the uptake. We
Mm-hmm.
don't know enough about it.
Peter had a question first.
Just a very quick one. I do endorse what you said about dressing the part for radio interviews. It puts you in a frame of mind.
That's a
And
good
calms
point.
you down a little bit, so I'd endorse that, in fact.
Yes, it's
Albeit the
professional,
radio
isn't it?
people are all relaxed in open shirts and everything else. And I can live in open shirts, but I do put a suit on if I've got to give a radio interview. And it does set you up just to a calmness and to be seen the part.
Yeah.
Make a quick last one, and then we're going to have Javier out. He wants a quick announcement. Quick last one?
Yes, I wonder, I was involved in a quite big collision recently, and then I found out that the actors, all kinds of things were on the internet already. So before the lawyers attended, all things were on the internet, and that's difficult to manage.
That is social media, and everybody becomes a journalist in that case.
I think as an expert, you just have to rely on the evidence that you see for yourself.
But
Or-
from a source that you can trust.
Don't rely on the internet.
No, because,
That's-
I mean, that's an interpretation of something, isn't it? If you saw, instead of a still, if you saw the ship going down, and you'd seen it filmed from the beach, it doesn't make it exactly what's happening. You don't actually know what lies behind it, do you? So if you see things on the internet, you don't know what the source is. You cannot use that.
Anyway, thank you for your allowing me to talk to you, and both here in Southampton and to the people watching remotely. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.